So I'm not going to talk very much about the house itself and its history, but really about what's the next act for this place. Much to the disgust of the immediate neighbors and to the intense frustration, really, of developers, the other stakeholders. On January 14th, 1966, the Gamble family signed a gift agreement with the city of Pasadena. I love that photo. A gift agreement with the city of Pasadena and the University of Southern California to maintain the Gamble House and make it available to the public. The gift agreement has been the guiding force in assuring the integrity of the house and the public spirit of the gift. The actual wording is quite simple. Donors desire to give the aforesaid property to a recipient capable of assuring its preservation for the use and enjoyment of the public. For the use and enjoyment of the public. These are the words that keep me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, because the way the public uses and enjoys architectural sites changes over time. Where are we headed? Over the past 5 decades, the form of that use and enjoyment has consisted primarily of offering traditional docent-led tours to the general public. At the beginning, tours were offered only on Tuesdays and Thursdays from noon to 3 p.m., hardly a convenient schedule for most people. In fact, it was destined to cater to that class of women familiarly known as housewives, ladies who lunch or could spend an hour or two of their afternoon to take in some local cultural site while their children were in school. This, by the way, is not one of those families. This is the Gamble family, and there's Mary Gamble with her husband and 2 of her boys in Japan when children should have been in school and the Gambles should have been working. Soon, however, one Sunday afternoon a month was added to accommodate people who mysteriously needed to work for a living. At first, the worry was that few would come to visit. So the house was subjected to a variety of other uses to justify its new public status. An upstairs bedroom, for example, seen here, was converted to the office of the local chapter of the American Institute of Architects. I'm here to tell you that it was still partly in that configuration when I arrived at the Gamble House 26 years ago. The AIA, God love them, had put in indoor-outdoor carpeting, a drop ceiling, and fluorescent lights, and removed the original light fixture from the center of the room to accommodate air conditioning ducts. We've done our best to undo what the good architects felt the need to accomplish in the late 1960s. Other bedrooms were used to accommodate visiting lecturers and dignitaries. Those visiting lecturers had it awfully good. They got to sit at the beautiful writing desk on the beautiful chairs with the inlay, all designed by the architects and made by their various craftsmen. When we discontinued the visiting dignitaries bed and breakfast program, the only people who complained were those who had had the benefit of that program in the past. While the Gamble family had left the house fairly intact and in a truly an excellent state of conservation, there are inevitably maintenance issues that come up and preservation. I forgot to say, meals were served in the dining room for events involving VIPs, and volunteers, our docents back in the early days, had their meetings in the living room sitting on the green and green furniture. And by the way, that sofa actually is not uncomfortable, regardless of what you may have heard. And the house was used, perhaps overused, very much as it was when the Gambles lived there. I also should remind you that the Gamble House was designed originally as a winter home and so got light use from the family in the early days. It was essentially used from Thanksgiving to Easter, late November, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the iconic holiday of American independence. So So while the house was delivered to the city and the University of Southern California in a good state of preservation, its use changed dramatically and very quickly. So think about the age of this house. When it became a public site in 1966, the house was 57 years old. If we think about that relative to a house of that age today, we might think, for example, of the Bailey House, case study number 21 that was earlier mentioned. In 1966, the Gamble House would have exerted the same kind of visual and cultural impact of a 1959 house today. This is a sobering thought, or it should be. It was, the Gamble House was boldly modern, yet expressive of a love of natural materials and craftsmanship that had then, by then, in 1966, been bypassed and even overlooked by many builders of that time as too expensive and elitist, and rightly so. This is a detail of a chiffonier, just speaking volumes about the combination of design, artistic design and craftsmanship and materials that the Gamble House is so famous for. In 1966, too, we have to remember that the preservation ethic in America was still faint, though growing, and most would agree, fainter than average in the Los Angeles region. The Federal Preservation Act had, after all, only just passed in Congress that same year. It is, too, celebrating its 50th anniversary as we are in 2016. Like the classic product life cycle of a, Procter & Gamble brand, Tide detergent or Pampers diapers, the Gamble House in 2016 has reached a certain maturity as a historic site. While it attracts a steady stream of devoted pilgrims, the majority are heritage tourism visitors from elsewhere, and most are over 50. Only about 5% of our visitors come from the city of Pasadena, which is good news to the city fathers whose coffers benefit from the tourism dollars that this statistic implies. For the Gamble House as an institution, however, there's a slightly darker subtext. If we do not do a better job of promoting the significance of our local architectural legacy among those immediately surrounding us, and especially the younger generations, how can we hope to expect them to care when the future day comes that significant resources need to be committed again to save this iconic work of early 20th century architecture from decay or, God forbid, indifference? I should say, by the way, that one of the conference sponsors, Kelly Sutherlin McLeod Architecture, was the, full disclosure here, was the architecture firm involved in the restoration of the house 10 years ago. Attracting a young local audience is the challenge of many similar cultural institutions. Options for entertainment and education among 20 and 30-somethings are vast and endlessly alluring. We are competing for a demonstrably shorter attention span as well. What we offer today and tomorrow needs to be consumable in a different way than it was yesterday. So what is the next act for a site such as the Gamble House that has been open and interpreted essentially in the same way for 50 years? A year and a half ago, we tested something dramatically different at the Gamble House to learn more about the appetite of a younger audience for consuming the experience. The concept was simple: to provide a compelling and relevant reason, and relevant is a key word here, relevant reason for an entirely new audience to visit, while simultaneously continuing to engage, or at least not alienate, our core demographic. Finding the comfortable yet edgy mix of the new and the next was the challenge taken up enthusiastically by Machine Project, an LA-based arts organization led by Mark Allen, who teaches art at Pomona as a graduate of Yale Fine Arts, that develops and curates artworks of various media to provide ways for audiences to engage more closely with art, and in this case, art spaces. Mark Allen memorably remarked to me, "I've done lots of art exhibits, Ted, but I've never done one in a work of art. As soon as he said that, I said, this is my guy. I'm going to be able to work with him. And in fact, it was a beautiful thing. Over 17 days in the fall of 2014, it was just immediately after he walked through the door that he said that, by the way. I've done lots of art exhibits, but never done one in a work of art. Over the 17 days of the festival in the fall of 2014, the Gamble House was transformed into an outdoor performance space. It's got a very long and quirky title that I won't repeat, but it's a vortex out of which the beak of a crane protrudes at the right moment as an opera singer walks up the driveway. You get the idea. Outdoor performance space, indoor performance space. You can just, on the left there, you can see a dancer doing a dance specifically choreographed for this staircase. And here is a group of four women dancers who choreographed a dance throughout the house, which took place during public tours. They simply worked around everybody. The tours were sometimes surprised to see these dancers come through. And if you've been to the Gamble House, you know that we have a rule. We ask people, please, to try not to step on the edges of the carpets, but to step into the carpet. So this dance was making kind of spoofing off of that request that we make of our visitors. So they very exaggeratedly would step into the carpets and not step on the edges. The house was transformed into gallery space for flat art and three-dimensional sculpture. The painting in the lower left-hand corner, if it looks like it's out of focus, it is. That it is impossible to focus on. That's part of the interesting. So the idea there was, there we are at Clarence Gamble's desk, where as a 14-year-old, he undoubtedly had trouble focusing on some of his studies from time to time. There were these subtle resonances with the history of the house, the history of the occupants, the craftsmanship. And there was a pop-up restaurant, a Japo-Swiss pop-up restaurant, which of course resonates with the influence that Japanese architecture has on the work of Green and Green and the Gamble House in particular, and the Swiss chalet overlay as well. So there's a conveyor belt. Bob Dornberger was the chef who created this conveyor belt and the menu, and down in the kitchen, in the catering kitchen in the basement of the Gamble House, he created these little delectables, which he then sent up to the south side of the house near the service entrance on the conveyor belt. And if there wasn't somebody there to catch the food, it would just fall off. But it was so well publicized. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times the day that this was offered, and so there was no chance of any of the food falling off. In fact, there was quite a line to wait for it. The attic provided a venue for a workshop. It was called the Ghost Writing Workshop, which was fascinating for the kids. They learned how to write like a ghost. Don't ask. There was our curator was a little nervous when we said, well, let's have two people, actually use the beds in the first floor guest bedroom. I had to remind her that had been a regular occurrence during the old days when the visiting lecturers to USC would come and stay. But there was quite an interesting chat, and the room was full of people, of course, sitting on the floor and standing around listening to this creative conversation going on. Mark Allen is the one on the left, and a friend of his, and they just had a kind of a freewheeling conversation. It was quite popular. And poets in closets. Oh, yes. There were several poets who wrote poems specifically for the Gamble House event, and then during tours, they would go up to someone and tap them on the shoulder and say, would you like to hear a personalized poem just read to you in one of the closets here. Well, you know, how do you say no to that? So we had a tsunami of visitors, and they were not our typical demographic of 40 or 50 plus. Not incidentally, key to managing the crowds and the variety of offerings has been our online ticketing relationship with ACME Technologies, also full disclosure, one of the sponsors of this conference. These are the kinds of logistical things that really need to be paid attention to when you have the expectation of a lot more visitors than you normally have. Thankfully, the Gamble House and its collection suffered no harm during the festival. There was plenty of wood to knock on, as I reminded myself of that. On the contrary, there were plenty of moments that proved the value of the concept and proved the respect that innovative art can engender when paired thoughtfully and relevantly with heritage sites. Our core demographic did not revolt. In fact, they responded enthusiastically. This is a laser projection on the outside of the house, which is quite fun. They responded enthusiastically and were proud of themselves, I think, for embracing that change. Curious younger audiences turned out in their thousands, and at the end of the day, the Gamble House remained the Gamble House that we know and love. Or did it? When the artworks had all packed up and left the house looked the same, but the public perception had altered. Happily, the use and enjoyment of the public carries a new connotation and the expectation of more of these kinds of events, which we plan to jealously guard and perpetuate to remain relevant for the new and next generations. Thank you very much.